32 teams in 32 days. This is episode number 16, the Arizona Cardinals episode. Let's welcome in Jess Root, site editor for Cards Wire. Jess, what's going on?
Not much. Getting ready for the draft. We're a little less than 3 weeks away. It's exciting times.
And it's funny because I'm using this series as a way to kind of track how far out we are. This is episode 16, so we are halfway. Well, since I started this, we're halfway to the draft, so about 16 days left until the draft, and very exciting. It's I can definitely feel it. I know, obviously, the Cardinals don't have that many picks, but they're sitting there at pick 16. A couple of corners are going to be available, a couple of offensive linemen. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But a good year for Arizona, so to speak. The division obviously gets a lot better. What are your thoughts on the way the NFC West looks right now?
Well, the big thing that everyone sort of forgets at the beginning is the Matthew Stafford trade. And the Rams, who were really good, at times looked like the best team in football. And it seemed like the quarterback position was the issue. They went out and got it, what it looks like got better. I'm a real big believer in Matthew Stafford. In fact, take 3 years ago, 4 years ago, when Carson Palmer was coming to the end of his career, Matthew Stafford was a guy I would have loved to see because they parallel their careers quite a bit. They've number one picks with big time talent, just have not been able to, have had some great on-field success, but haven't been able to turn that into team success. And I think Stafford is going to be great for the Rams. I think it puts them definitely as the favorite. The other two teams are really kind of interesting for me because the 49ers, they were a Super Bowl team 2 years ago. But their defense was so good, but they just have to deal with so many injuries. They're a team that if they're healthy, if Jimmy Garoppolo is healthy, they're legitimately solid. And the Seahawks, it's tough to see how that's going to play out this next season. Obviously, the skill players, how much of this offseason drama is going to affect the play of Russell Wilson, maybe the chemistry within the team. And so it's a division there where you look at the Rams and feel that they're the favorites, and then the rest is completely up for grabs.
Right. I feel like obviously they have Russell Wilson, and as long as Seattle has Russell Wilson, they'll be in a position to compete. But it seems if they're that team who could potentially fall off this year, maybe even finish last in the division. When all the other teams are getting younger, Arizona's getting younger. The Rams filled probably their only hole. Obviously, San Fran getting healthier, still have Jimmy G, and they're probably bringing in a young star quarterback and still have one of the best coaches in the league. Seattle's kind of the outlier there because not many free agents are coming. Russell Wilson and Pete Carroll don't seem to be on the same page. So I could definitely see them falling off a cliff in 2021. But Kyler Murray started the year off really well, had multiple spectacular performances, then bottoms out, ends the season struggling with injuries. Now, year two is normally the breakout year for young quarterbacks. So what did you make of his second year, and where is he heading into year three?
Honestly, he's exceeded any expectations that's been tossed at him, because coming in as the number one pick, he was better than you could have expected as a rookie, got rookie of the year. And then to take that to the next level as a second year player, to get the Cardinals within, honestly, it was a missed field goal away from the playoffs. Had Zane Gonzalez made that kick against the Patriots, it wouldn't have mattered. Nothing else would have mattered how they finished the season. They would have been in the postseason. He had one of the best seasons, even still, that we've seen a quarterback have historically for the Cardinals. He was a Pro Bowler, and so as many expectations as a number one pick has coming into the league, we've seen number one pick quarterbacks that don't have that sort of thing. You take Carson Palmer, for one, was a number one pick. His career didn't pan out or progress quite how, or Matthew Stafford. Guys like Peyton Manning, it took him a while to be great. And Murray is right there on the verge of greatness. The players around the league already see him as a star. And so, especially now that they've solidified the interior of the offensive line. They got really good tackle play last year. They add Rodney Hudson up the middle. And so you've got what should be a better protection, even though he wasn't sacked a lot last year. His sacks were down tremendously last year. The offensive line was actually a strength, but they get stronger up the middle, and they add AJ Green on the outside. Even though there's some talk, there'll be some discussion as to how good he'll be. He's still an upgrade over what they've had. You have now AJ Green in a role where he doesn't have to face number one guys. You've got Hopkins, who is a stud. You've got Green, who's going to be facing number twos, and is now, I think you can say that even now he is probably a better and more consistent Z than Christian Kirk had been. And now Kirk moves to the slot, where everyone thought that he was going to be great coming out of college, but he hasn't played much of it. And so it's going to be interesting to see how that works, but it looks like that the passing game, at least the options of the passing game, have gotten better. The protection up the middle has gotten better. And add on top of that, his run, like, if they need to add, like, Chase Edmonds was really good in his role. They need to add a running back so that the running game can be very good when Murray isn't being special. Because the running game was really good last year, but it was almost all based on Murray's success. When Murray was running the ball, they were unstoppable in the running game. And so they add that element, but the passing game should be better this year, which really it's going to be fun to see how good he can be in year 3. I mean, we saw Josh Allen explode in year 3. Right. Now, Kyler Murray was better in year 1 and year 2 than Josh Allen was. And so it'll be interesting to see how the progress goes from there.
Yeah, so they were a very surprised team in contention for J.J. Watt. They ended up getting the deal done, of course. Were you surprised at all that they made this move?
Not actually, no. They were never one that was necessarily nationally on the radar, but I knew that there was a possibility, and he is the type of player that the Cardinals would go after. There was the obvious connect. Well, they had some connections already with DeAndre Hopkins, Vance Joseph, who had coached him, who had been on that coaching staff when Watt first entered the league and playing that same sort of defense. It was really, and Arizona is a place where, and now we've seen it, is that we've seen historically, not always to good results, where veteran players come to Arizona towards the end of their career because it's a great place to be.
So they obviously brought in a ton of veterans, J.J. Watt, A.J. Green. We'll talk about Green in a second. But Rodney Hudson comes over via trade. Everybody was surprised he was going to get released. Vegas kind of said, we're going to release him. Then it turned into a win-win because Vegas at least gets some compensation. For one of the best centers in the league, how big is this for Kyler Murray to finally have an elite center in front of him?
It's great. It's fantastic. And it was obviously a priority because the Cardinals were in on Corey Linsley. They end up, now aside from the draft pick compensation, they now get, because they extended his contract, now they've got Rodney Hudson for 3 years, $30 million. And that's kind of the price that they were looking at for Corey Linsley, who ended up getting a 12.5 per year. They basically swap picks. So they gave up their third, got an extra 7th. So it cost them a little bit in terms of a day 2 pick. But Hudson, you can argue, has been consistently better for longer than Linsley has been. He is a stud of a center he's tough in the middle. He's immovable, and in a division that has interior players like Aaron Donald, that's invaluable.
Yeah, it's really interesting when you look at all these young quarterbacks. Most of them don't have great protection. Deshaun Watson forever just has not had great protection for Houston. They finally brought over Laramie Tunsil a couple years ago. Then it kind of worked out. Russell Wilson for years wasn't protected. Joe Burrow obviously not protected towards ACL. Justin Herbert had arguably a worse offensive line in LA than Cincinnati had with Joe Burrow. But people say all the time, you have to get young offensive linemen for your young quarterback. And when a team like Arizona brings in Rodney Hudson, who's 33, 34 years old, they're like, oh, well, he's old. But they don't realize that, okay, he needs to be protected right now. And then when he's gone, then you can get younger. Then you can kind of build that offensive line. But Arizona's sitting here like, well, we don't want Murray running for his life every play right now. Yeah, we can spend number 16 overall on a tackle, on an interior lineman, and develop him. But you can still do that whilst bringing in a 33-year-old veteran.
That's true. But and what the Cardinals are doing is they're taking advantage of. They've got a 2-year window right now with him on his rookie deal, where they're really trying to. So they feel they've got the talent, but now they're adding veteran talent. They are, with the exception of 2 players, they are not relying on their young players. They have veteran leadership, they have veteran experience where if the young people outperform them, great, but they're not going to rely on it like they had for the last couple of years. The exception would be Isaiah Simmons this year. He enters in as the number 1 other inside backer next to Jordan Hicks. And then 2 is Byron Murphy, their third-year corner. Everyone else, they put, like at the guard position, for example, they added Brian Winters. Even though they've got Josh Jones, they drafted as a tackle last year, he's going to be in the mix, or Justin Murray as well. But they brought in Brian Winters, and if he wins that job, great. They have tackles, they have veteran tackles. The cornerbacks that they brought in, so they brought in Malcolm Butler, and they brought back Robert Alford. They brought in an old kicker. And then AJ Green, they bring in him as well. And so they're young players in Andy Isabella and Keyshawn Johnson who really haven't done much yet in the pros. If they perform, fantastic. But they're not banking on it.
Right. So AJ Green now, 100+ targets last season in Cincinnati. Not his best year in terms of actually catching the football, but it was his first healthy season in a couple years. Got himself a nice payday for a 1-year contract in Arizona. Looking like he's ready to go down there, team up with Kyler Murray. What were your thoughts on bringing him in? Because the Cardinals have spent a ton of draft picks the last couple of years on receivers, obviously bringing in DeAndre Hopkins, not getting quite the production from Keyshawn Johnson. Christian Kirk hasn't really broken out yet. So bringing in this veteran, what do you think that this does for them?
Well, and for since Larry Fitzgerald, we think he's probably retiring. Considering we've been paying Larry Fitzgerald 11-12 million for the past several seasons, $6 million for an AJ Green isn't that bad. People say, well, the one thing I read is where one scout said, or one front office person, he's a minimal. No, he's not a minimum deal player right now. Steve Keim talked about it. The 112, 118 targets that he had, that 38 of those targets were uncatchable. They still see on film a player who moves very well, who runs great routes, who catches the ball extremely well in traffic. And now he's not going to be the focal points of defenses, which makes things much better for him, which means he'll be able to be more, and as an outside option, as a true Z, he'll be able to play on the outside better than Christian Kirk. He get better size and better hands on the outside than Christian Kirk had. So I think it's going to be very, very good in the passing game for them. It will help DeAndre Hopkins and it'll help AJ Green. And I think as well, you're going to get, because Larry Fitzgerald just hasn't moved around, doesn't move as well as he has in the past. Christian Kirk in the slot, I think, brings a little extra dimension. He might not be the reliable target that Fitz is, but I think you get a little bit more explosiveness, assuming he can stay healthy, because that's been his deal basically his entire career.
Yeah, last couple of years, other than last year, which people were surprised he stayed healthy, missed all of 2019, was supposed to come back. So I'm a Bengals fan, so I know a lot about AJ Green, obviously. In 2019, it was a foot injury, was only supposed to be out a couple weeks, and then just kept getting worse and never ended up playing in 2019. Came over last year. Looked like him and Joe Burrow were on the same page throughout training camp. Didn't turn out that way. Was targeted so many times, and he needed a fresh start. Everyone knew he was probably out of Cincinnati, especially with the emergence of T. Higgins, and he gets this with Arizona, teaming up with Hopkins. Kyler Murray gets another big body, reliable target that he has in Larry Fitzgerald, but it's kind of an upgrade over Larry Fitzgerald, who is ageless. But most would argue that the cornerback position is a huge need for Arizona. Malcolm Butler is going to come in, bring some depth. Hasn't had the greatest of consecutive seasons with Tennessee, but still is a very solid player. Now, it's safe to say that the cornerback position is probably not done being addressed, but do you think this is a good start bringing in Malcolm Butler?
I think so. If you look at the passing numbers, the pass defense last year, they were top 10 pass defense, and they didn't get great play at cornerback. Patrick Peterson, he was very good at times, but his bad was bad. Drake Kirkpatrick, he was underwhelming. I mean, he was fine, but there wasn't anything special about it he played. Byron Murphy was really solid was up and down. Needs to be more consistent, but I think Malcolm Butler is an upgrade over what he's an upgrade over what Peterson was last year, and I think at the very minimum, his worst games were going to be better than Patrick's worst games. He might not be quite as good as Patrick's best games, but it will bring a little more consistency to the number one corner position, which I think is what they needed. And as it was last year, like I said, with the additions they've made in the pass rush, Chandler Jones comes back, they get J.J. Watt, then Marcus Golden, they bring back. That front four on their pass rush with Jordan Phillips from a couple of years ago, 9.5 sacks with the Bills. It adds, and then you get Isaiah Simmons there with his speed. If they're better up front, if they are just adequate in the secondary, and they've already got a great safety, Malcolm Butler is a proven cornerback. If they can get adequate play from their other corners and safety spots, that defense could be very, very solid this year, because they started out really good and just they dealt, like, all of their defensive linemen except for one made it on injured reserve at some point during the season.
Yeah, so when most people or most teams lose someone like Patrick Peterson, a cornerstone piece, whatever position it is, it sometimes takes them years to fill it. For the Cardinals, they're kind of looking like they're going to add it piece by piece. Did you think that they were just going to make one big splash at corner to try to replace Patrick Peterson, or do you think it's going to be more depth guys, addition by committee type thing? Because they still have pick 16, which could be spent on a corner. We'll talk about that in a second. But how do you think they're going to go about replacing Patrick Peterson?
I expected them to make a splash. I could have seen them going out and signing a J.C. Jackson or trading for the kid out of William Jackson out of Cincinnati, or even better, making a trade for Marshawn Lattimore in the last year of his deal, kind of like how they did for Chandler Jones when he entered his last year of his deal in New England. I thought they would go that route. Instead, they get a solid guy in Butler, 1-year deal, and I think they're just going to try and make do for now, because I from what I heard is that they didn't love what was out there at cornerback, especially after the top names came off the board, and they just didn't have the money to go and spend a ton. And so it works out really well. I think cornerback is going to be a priority at 16, but I'm not going to just say that's going to be the pick. The Cardinals never like to be forced into a particular position.
Right. So let's get right into that. Pick 16, J.C. Horn. Like, that's been the guy who's been mocked all over Arizona. What do you think of him? Would you be surprised if they took him, maybe a different corner, or maybe even going offense? Like,
I could see them
on 16?
A lot of ways. 16, like at that pick, it's super. You could do a lot of things. Do a lot of ways. Cornerback, especially if Horn. It's just interesting at where they have it. You have to see where they have them on their board. Caleb Farley, if it were not, I'm not worried about that after what he explained about his back surgery, that it's not something that, it wasn't a football injury, it was a workout injury, and that the second procedure was simply because he didn't do it the first time, and he just never, and he's just taking care of it now because he can. Surtain, J.C. Horn, Farley, all three of those guys, I would love at number 16. I don't know what the Cardinals are with Farley. I think they might see him a little lower, or maybe it's just because of the injury red flag. But I don't think you can go wrong with any of those three in terms of the quality. And even still, you got a guy like Greg Newsome, who is quietly solid. The numbers that he put up there in the Big Ten were really good. But you could also go another way. A guy that kind of has gone under the radar is Paulson Adebo at Stanford. He's not going to get first round love, and so if you think he's going to be there because he didn't play in 2020, he was in 2019. He looked on track to be a first round pick, but he didn't play in 2020. He opted out, and so he's kind of been out of sight, out of mind. And then the emergence of Surtain and Horn and Farley have all sort of kind of, but so the Cardinals could have, especially if one of the big time receivers are there, say you've got Jalen Waddle or Devontae Smith still on the board, they could easily be the pick there. One of the pass rushers, Jalen Phillips would be a great value there, because the pass rush, they're old at the pass rush with Watt and Jones, and that's a premium position. There's been talk about the offensive line. The thing I don't like about the offensive line is because there is no first round lineman that's likely playing this year. And while it wouldn't be a bad idea to do it, I think they also trust their offensive line coach and Sean Kugler to be able to develop guys. And so they could use a pick day 2, day 3. The name that's kind of, I don't know if it's just because we've hit that point. Kyle Pitts, he's not going to make it to number 16, but the potential of maybe trading up. I think the Cardinals have a scenario. They have a pick in mind, kind of a target. If he drops to a certain number where they will go up and get him, I think he would be a game changer for the offense. Just the type of player he is, even though Cliff Kingsbury has never been, with the exception of his first year at Texas Tech when he had Jason Amaro, he's never had a prolific pass catching tight end. And even Dan Arnold last year, who they thought was going to be a big time player, had 31 catches. And that's kind of all I expected out of him. I think Pitts would be a game changer for him. But if I had to rank Thurns and Pierce, I really like even Farley. So if any of those 3 cornerbacks are there, they're right at the top. Smith or Waddle, Jalen Phillips, and maybe even Rashad Bateman. I don't know. I think he will be. I think he'll be really good in the pros too. So I like almost all the options that they have. Another thing that could come for some might come out of nowhere is, let's not just forget the running back position, because Travis Etienne has already said he'd love to be drafted by the Cardinals at 16. That's kind of his dream scenario. He and Chase Edmonds are kind of 2 of the same back. Now, personally, if I could draw it up, if they could maybe trade back a few spots, draft Najee Harris, you won't regret that. And I think that would make that offense special, because Harris is a guy who I don't think you're not going to go wrong with him. He gives you a little different dynamic at the back to complement Chase Edmonds. And I think he will have an instant impact on that team. And you would then have a running game that is a running production of the running back position that's independent of Kyler Murray's legs, which makes that offense even better.
Yeah, so that definitely makes sense, them trading back, because normally, unless you, well, first of all, when you don't have many picks, Cardinals only have 2 picks in the first 4 rounds this year because of a couple trades and that stuff. But normally when, you have positions of need, and unless you like a guy that much, you'll take him there and not blink. You won't think twice. But for the Cardinals, you said potentially edge, wide receiver, tight end, running back, and of course corner. Most of those positions, there's 4 or 5 guys that not only are first round talents, could fall to the second round. So trading back, gaining some extra picks, that seems like definitely a viable spot for them, unless they fall in love with Horn. My Twitter is a Greg Newsome fan account. I absolutely love that guy. I think he's spectacular, top 15, top 20 talent in the draft. So unless they know that this guy is going to be a star and they'll take him at 16 and not think twice about it, trading back definitely feels like something that is a real possibility.
Yeah, it all comes down to they have to have someone who wants to trade up. But in any case, at 16, there's a lot of different ways they could go, and I don't think there's a bad way to go, honestly. I mean, there are players that I would rather not see them get. Like, if I don't want them taking the 5th best receiver, like a Kadarius Toney at number 16, I don't know if that's the best use of the pick. But at 16, you're going to get a good corner, you're going to get a good pass rusher, and if you end up with one of the top receivers, you're going to get a great receiver too.
Yeah. So obviously Cardinals, once again, only have 2 picks in the first 4 rounds, 16 and 49 overall. If they do stay at 16, we talked about what they could do at 16, but 49. So let's say they go defense at 16. BPA is most likely the strategy, or could you see them going into the draft wanting to get 1 offense, 1 defense?
I think they typically go with their board overall. Now, if they go corner in the first, I could see them targeting a running back or a tight end in the second, especially a guy that would be. But if they go running back or receiver in the first, then you could go. There's a couple corners that Asante Samuel might be there for that pick. I think he'd be a fun pick there. Pat Freiermuth, tight end out of Penn State, comes to mind. Would be a pretty solid selection there. I think he can play both ways in the passing game. If Javonte Williams falls, and that he could be available. I've even heard about Javonte Williams considering being running back one. So it just depends on whose board you're looking at. But you have a lot of options, and like I mentioned before, Paulson Adebo. If they don't go cornerback in the first round, I think Adebo makes Adebo or Asante Samuel both make really good options at corner in the second round. If not, then you could go for one of the interior linemen like a Creed Humphrey or Aaron Banks from Notre Dame would also come to mind as well.
So this is what I ask everybody when they came on. Say you're the general manager, owner, you're part of the brass at pick 16. Who are you taking? Let's say, so Waddle's gone. The top 3 receivers are gone. Bateman's there. Marshall's there. Horn is there. Surtain and Farley are gone. So it's just Horn, Newsome, Samuel's there as well. Pitt's gone. Freiermuth is there. And then Phillips is there too.
I think Horn would be my pick in that scenario, because, well, I think it's the most premium position. It's going to be hardest to fill, and on top of the need that they have. So you not only have the potential for him moving forward, they have a need for him now, and it's a premium position that's hard to find otherwise. Vance Joseph can get past rushing production in other ways. We saw it last year. Hassan Reddick exploded. Dennis Gardeck had 7 sacks and 93 defensive snaps. And so you can generate pressure, but to get a guy that can legitimately that could be your corner one, would be fantastic to have in the first round. And then in round 2, I'm looking at the tight end position or running back, depending on who's on the board. And then really you've addressed your biggest defensive need, and then you fill a big need on offense as well. That could contribute right away.
Yeah, and one last thing. Some people who've come on have talked about corner and filling that, and you make a great point saying the position that's the premium position that's hardest to fill. If you look at the top corners in the league, Ramsey, Alexander, Gilmore, Tre'Davious White, those are probably the consensus top 4 corners in the league. All of those guys were taken in the first round. So it is a very hard position to fill, especially for a team that just lost Patrick Peterson, who's been there almost a decade. So it's very hard to fill. History says you need to spend a premium pick on it. It looks like the Cardinals are going towards that direction. But Jess, thanks so much for coming on, man.
No problem. Appreciate having me on.
Awesome. And thank you guys for listening. Thank you guys for watching this episode of 32 Teams in 32 Days. I'll catch you in the next one.